Good afternoon, everyone. The International Parking and Mobility Institute presents today's Shop Talk, the impact of COVID-19 on customer behavior and the future of the parking industry. My name is Kristen Vitello, and I will be assisting David Hoyt, Pam Corbin, and Brent Matthews in moderating today's Shop Talk. As a reminder, today's Shop Talk is being recorded. We will post a recording to IPMI's YouTube channel in a few days. Before we start, I would like to go over a few quick housekeeping rules for today. If you have a webcam and are comfortable doing so, we ask you to please turn on your camera. IPMI wants everyone to feel engaged and to participate, and we would love to see your smiling faces. We want this virtual Shop Talk to be just like regular Shop Talks, face-to-face and sharing our ideas. As a reminder, we would like all participants' lines to mute and unmute anytime you would like to speak. For individuals that are calling in via phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and press *6 to unmute your line once you have been recognized. You may also type your questions into the chat. To access the chat feature, click the chat icon and then type your questions or comments and click send. I will then read them to the group. Before I turn it over to David Hoyt, David Honorato, CAP, IPMI's chair, would like to say a few words. David?
Thanks, Kristen, and good afternoon or good morning to those joining from the West Coast. I would like to welcome everyone to today's Shop Talk, Impacts of COVID-19 on Consumer Behavior and Future of the Industry. As we all continue to adapt coming out of COVID-19, it's always good to hear how our peers in the industry are navigating the many curves that COVID-19 continues to throw at us. That's why it's important IPMI continues to provide us with the forums to connect with the industry. And today, we are fortunate to have a panel of industry experts to lead today's Shop Talk on current and future impacts of COVID-19. Before I turn it back over to Kristen, I'd like to wish everyone a healthy, happy, and safe New Year. Kristen?
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for those words. Now I am going to turn the audience over to David Hoyt. David?
Hey, Kristen. Dave, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't mind him taking stuff.
Welcome, everyone. As Dave and Kristen both spoke about, we're going to talk a little bit today about the impacts of COVID-19 on consumer behavior and the parking industry in general. We're just working out some technical difficulties here. I'm your moderator. It's starting to move now. I'm David Hoyt. I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Park Mobile. We've got a couple of contributors today that are going to start some of the talks, answer some of the questions that we had coming into the Shop Talk, but ultimately, as Kristen mentioned, this is a Shop Talk. So we really want active engagement along the way. I'm going to monitor the chat as well as possible. We're going to have some polling questions, but really your involvement in this Shop Talk is what's going to make this a success. So a little bit of a kind of a rewind, I guess, when you really think of it. January 2020, COVID-19 is really not officially spreading in the US. This is a chart of kind of the transaction trajectory of Park Mobile. And as you can see, we're extremely excited on the trajectory of parking transactions at Park Mobile. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit. We had empty cities, we had closed offices. And as you can see, early in March or mid-March, our transaction volumes plummeted. This isn't a new topic for us here in the parking and transportation space, but it just kind of sets the tone that this was 2020, early on in 2020. What are we seeing today? What is some of the impact that we're having today? I think when we look back a year ago, we thought we may be a little bit further. But the big picture around COVID, this was a once in a lifetime change to the parking industry. It wasn't just volume, right? It was underlying consumer dynamics. Now we're seeing some demand back, but the world is completely different. And that's what we're here to talk about. The new normal, we hear that a lot, but the new normal is being written today and continues to evolve. So to start the conversation, this is how we kind of display suppliers, and we group this in beach, municipality, university, and others. And we know that we've got a vast array of people that are joining the Shop Talk, but this is really a view of how transactions dipped early in 2020 and kind of where they're at in 2021. So I'm going to start the conversation. I'm going to go to Pam. And generally speaking, what have your levels of your operations recovered? What level has your operations recovered to date? And what have you seen, in the last year to 2 years in Greenville and Orlando before that?
Well, in Greenville, I think this particular chart actually shows a little bit of an increase at a higher rate than we actually increased. But as far as overall revenue, we're back at a normal place we were before here in Greenville. But one of the things that shifted is our monthly parking demand has gone down and our transient parking or hourly parking has gone up. And a couple of things is, one is people may not be coming back for monthly parking because they may only be working once a week. So it's kind of changed that. And then another thing is the city of Greenville is actually a tourist destination. A lot of people don't realize it, but it's a tourist destination. And a lot more people are actually going on shorter trips and actually driving in. So we're actually seeing a lot more people driving to the hotels rather than taking flights in and stuff like that. But we've recovered. It's just different. It shifted from, where our monthlies were high and our transient was, stable. And it's kind of made a shift in that. And then, of course, as you know, we just went with Park Mobile, let's see, at the end of December in 2 of our surface lots. And it's running about 50% of the people that are actually paying, a little higher, a little lower, but about 50% of the people are paying through the mobile app. So I think we're going to see more and more where people like that contactless, not dealing with people, not wanting to come in contact with people. I can't really talk about the recovery in Orlando because I actually left there in October of 2020. So, but I understand that their growth is a little bit slower there than it was. It's kind of still dipped down there.
Great. Thanks, Pam. Hey, Brent, how about you? What's Chattanooga? What would you say that the level of your operations, how are they in the recovery stage in Chattanooga?
I'd say on street, we're back to about 70% of what we were in the past. Surface lots, we're back to pre-2020 numbers. So our surface lots have come back strong. And we see a lot of the same things that Pam does in Greenville. The monthlies are just slow to come back. A lot of them still working from home. A lot of the big companies haven't brought them back. And, a lot of our revenue is driven by our transient right now. It's just not, the monthlies haven't come back very strong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anybody else, if you want to provide some insight on what, the level of recovery is in your operations, please unmute at this time. And, let's open this discussion up.
So this is, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is Scott Petrie, Philadelphia Parking Authority. Likewise, garages are full. Train lots are not that full. And of course, transactions are through the roof. Meters in particular, just through the roof by way of revenue. I think we're about to hit our 1 millionth transaction with regard through Park Mobile. So that's pretty phenomenal. We're just seeing tremendous, and the transient numbers are just leading the way in the garages. So a lot of people want to use their cars. They don't really still want to jump on public transit. And I think it's 2 issues. It's one, some fear, but it's also we're not in every day, so why get a trans pass?
Dave, this is Dave Honorado from Pittsburgh. We're coming back a little slower. We're at about 60% of our revenues for the garages and meters. And largely, and we see the same trend. We took a big hit on the number of leases that were canceled when COVID hit, and they're not returning because 4 of our major employers in the downtown area are still working remotely from home, and it keeps getting pushed back. So that's what's difficult. It's out of our control. Demand has changed, but it's not coming back. Street meters are coming back. Revenues are coming back a little better than the garages, but we're still probably off a third of what we were in 2019.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anybody else?
So this is Will McDonald. I represent the Pasadena Parking Division. And one of the things that we've noticed is in our garage system, March of this year, we jumped up to 85% of previous revenue. But since then, we've stayed flat. So we've been kind of really adjusting to maybe this might be the new flow of traffic we're at. I'm not going to say new norm. And I just wanted to see if anybody else, I feel like we had a very quick recovery, but then it just seemed as soon as we hit that 85% mark, we just flatlined and we haven't seen, any type of increase since then.
That's interesting, Will. So anybody seen that kind of that same impact on their side where they may have had a pretty decent recovery out of the gate, but now they're flatlining?
This is Kerry Red from the City of New London Parking Authority. To the gentleman's point, we had a very robust spring and summer. What we're not seeing is employers bringing their employees back into office space. So to that end, in order to parallel what happened during the summer, we fashioned some new agreements, which is contrary to all on-street parking theology, to actually contract some monthly spaces out to in various commercial areas in order to address the flattened revenue production over the winter months, which we believe will continue until April. But I would also add an anecdote that New London, like Newport and most coastal communities, is a tourism destination. And so the trend, as I look back over the last 5 years, notwithstanding the revenue, is very similar, that we have 6 months of robust activity and then a lull during the winter season.
Kerry, that's great. And, a couple of folks have mentioned kind of, tourist and maybe some evolution of where parking or where our generators are in the industry. We actually have a question that we've got queued up in a little bit, so I'll get to that one here shortly. Kristen, why don't you do our first poll, and we'll get some engagement from the audience on a poll.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, we sure can. And, this one I think is interesting in the sense of, we're asking, what level is your organization back to work in person? We get a lot of talk about, and even a couple of folks have talked about employers not bringing back employees. What about us? How are we as an industry adapting, and where are we at?
So a question on this question, I just answered 100%, but now I'm thinking you really want to know, with the challenges we're facing, what our real attendance level is. I mean, we're supposed to all be back, but maybe we're not.
Yeah, Scott, that's a good point. I think what we're just trying to see is, what is really, our attendance coming back to in person. I'll give you an example. On our side, we opened the office until recently where we shut it down for 2 weeks. We had an open office, so 100% of the people could come in, but we're probably at, 40% people coming in, and in some cases even lower than that on any given day.
Okay, so if you could send the survey back out, I want to change my answer.
All right, we'll take that into account. Kristen, if you want to
David,
end the poll.
I answered that too. I did 80%, Scott, because we're open completely for all our employees, but we're having difficulties in filling positions, especially out in the field in some office positions. So I took that into consideration when I didn't do it 100%. We're open on a regular basis, but we're closed to the public, and most of our transaction with the public is online. But we are having difficulties filling vacant positions and people just not returning and finding other work or not working since the return to the office.
So, hey, Dave.
I guess 3 is the charm, Pam, Floyd, or David, because like both Scott and Dave, I answered that at 100%. Knowing that we have challenges filling some positions on our transient side or in our transit side of the house. But considering our office staff and our maintenance crew, that is at 100%, but we just can't not get enough bus drivers to fuel our micro transit system.
Carrie, that's a great point. And it wasn't a question that I had pre-selected, but I just think even as recent as last night, I saw something on the news about the Great Resignation and really getting people back to the workplace and the challenges that we're having, getting folks to work. Anybody else experiencing those challenges to staffing your operations? And is it more like Carrie's experience where it's a lot on the transit side versus something else, or is it, kind of across the board?
Stan Savage, I'm with we too have experienced a lot with the return to work, and then we have a number of positions based on our mandate from the NBA where we have to have individuals tested, and so we perform that function, and as a result, we have a lot of either no-shows or individuals have either been exposed to whatever that limits their opportunity to work. And in addition to that, we also have an event day type of situation where we're having restrictions in terms of the individuals who come to the Hawks games or the concerts, and so we pretty much have, typically based on the call outs, somewhere around 7% of our individuals return, I would say 50 to 70. And then on our dark days, when we typically have, been kind of business, we restricted our typical administrative staff, and we don't have face-to-face meetings with conference rooms and things of that particular nature. And so we're all offline, except potential things of that nature. So, and for what we do with our neighbors and some of our stakeholders, they're experiencing that same type of situation with staffing, based on higher numbers with the COVID variant.
Stan, thanks. That's a great point. So Stan, in case you didn't get it, Stan is at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. So he deals with a lot, of staffing around that event side, which is never an easy staff to get to begin with, even in the best of times. And, now with restrictions and testing and everything else, it sounds like it's just continuing to complicate.
And one thing I just put to add, Dave, to the colleagues that are on the phone, one of the things that we've done from our standpoint is we've started to land all of the issues with staffing. I'm not sure how it is, but it came to a place where that they're hiring. So we've looked at allowing certain types of full-time benefits for our part-time staff, like individuals who work on a holiday if they're part-time and have, based on kind of the pattern, which obviously, being sensitive to, not only HR policy, other types of we have in the HR world, but we see patterns of call outs. We've implemented things such as what we call service. So back to back of likelihood that somebody may call night number 2, we know we really need to have staffing. We'll slate those as surges if we add an additional $5 an hour to part-time staff, and so help with the percentage of our and we've definitely got some different doing.
Well, that's great. So is anybody else doing something unique like Stan is when it comes to these staffing shortages? Sounds like Stan is having different incentives. Has anybody moved to, doing an incentive or something that they didn't do in the past or didn't even anticipate doing? Well, if that's a no, then let's go to another question. This is a chart, if you look at the screen, that talks about at least how we saw the vaccine impact when it came to transaction volume. Transactions recovered at least on the, on-street Park Mobile world, before the vaccine. But now it's trending, along the vaccine line more than it did. I don't have the most up-to-date information that we were able to pull, so this is a little bit dated back to, 8/15, but I was just curious, and maybe a general question, I'll start with Brent on this. Did you see any recovery around the vaccine line, or what was the vaccine impact in Chattanooga, if any?
We're a tourist-driven city for a lot of our stuff, and we saw people coming back out even before the vaccine was widely administered. It's helped us, but I think we were seeing an uptick before the vaccine got widely distributed.
Pam, is that similar to Greenville, given your dynamics of the parking, your parking consumer?
Yeah, I think so. A lot like Brent had said, we have a lot of tourists and stuff. And then, of course, we have, Greenville, as you know, has free on-street parking. So it's really difficult to, do any measurement of that. But even when I came, back in October of 2020, the streets were full. So, but I think it start increasing once the vaccine got more widely distributed. There were more people actually coming back into the workplace.
All right, so let's open that question up to the group. Is there any correlation between, transaction volume and vaccine at your operations?
Hey, this is Will McDonald with Pasadena again. I think one of the things that we saw being out here in California was that it was really more driven about what the local government was doing as far as shutdowns. Obviously, I'm originally from Florida, came up there. So, seeing how the two states that, I call home handled everything, it was so differently. So a lot of times our correlation was, were the restaurants shut down? Were we open for indoor dining? Were we open for delivery only? More so than I think vaccine distribution.
Will, that's a great point. Before I let you go, what does it look like today in California, in your neck of the woods? Are you shutting down again? Is it kind of how it was before? What does it look like today?
No, I think that ship has sailed. So I know. So in Pasadena, we have our own health department. So although we are in LA County, we are not bound by LA County's rules. So right now, everything is open. There are stipulations in LA County that you have to show that you are fully vaccinated to actually eat indoors at restaurants. However, Pasadena did not follow suit with that order, so it's not into effect. But as of right now, it's essentially pre-pandemic. Businesses are fully open. There is an indoor mask mandate for non-restaurants, and then obviously if you're technically not eating and drinking. But I don't feel that's really affected anything. People just kind of want to get back, out and about.
Yeah, thanks for the input. How about anybody else? Vaccine impact or, current situation with the trend that we're having with positivity around Omicron?
This is Moira from University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And we actually we're starting classes on this coming Monday. We had a 3-week mini term in January that was online. So we haven't had the students back on campus yet. So we haven't had that influx. But the public schools went back, and this entire week, the public schools are out because of staffing shortages. There are over 10% of the staff that are either quarantining or were exposed or whatever. And I've got an 18-year-old senior in high school that is sitting on the couch watching Instagram all week. So I think that it may hit our university in about 3 weeks, but because we are Tennessee and we are not California, we don't have the mask mandates. In the schools, the kids are wearing them, thank God, because it would be a whole lot worse. But at the university, our state has said that we don't have to. And so, but the chancellor has asked us to. So I think that the kids will be wearing them again. We avoided a spike last fall because our students wore masks all the time indoors, and it was wonderful. So it's kind of we're kind of a wait and see. What my boss's boss is worried about is staffing shortages, specifically amongst our staff and with Omicron and with the lot attendance, especially with basketball season in full gear. Concerts are coming back. And what if we don't have enough people to run those events? So I think that that's where our concern is as far as a university.
Well, Moira, I will tell you that I also have an 18-year-old that's probably sitting on the couch, spending more time on Instagram than they are in their remote learning in the state of Florida. So I feel your pain.
Well, that'd be 2 jobs for us. We got tow truck drivers. We need about 20. We need about 100 PEOs. So, and there's a lot of other really good positions. Tell them to apply.
Listen, Scott, I'll ship them up to Philadelphia. We'll get them in ship top shape there for real quick. That's for sure.
There's no question if they get in under Kareem, they'll be in shape. They won't be watching TV. Yeah.
This is Pam from Greenville. I just have a question for everyone with the people that has a lot of shortages. I mean, we're just down 1 parking enforcement officer, and I know Greenville Transit is down quite a few bus drivers. But is it due to, like in Greenville, as in Orlando, there were no layoffs? Everyone continued to report to work, and then the people worked at home, but there was never a layoff. Are you guys that have all the problems with getting the employees, like 100 parking enforcement officers, were they laid off during the pandemic?
No, they were not. There was only 60 days where we were in a limited enforcement safety only, and we weren't checking meters. So they've been employed. They were really thrilled to be employed, but the thrill and the excitement of all that is sort of gone away. It's interesting. The Philadelphia Business Journal just broke a new wave of resignations, and it's called the CEOs. So apparently we're all supposed to turn in our resignations right now. I don't know what we're living on, but we're supposed to be resigning because we want to spend more time with the family.
Yeah, okay. I've seen, a lot of that going on, but I'd be curious to know how people are living too. I was just wondering if there was a direct correlation with that since we weren't having that issue here. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I hate to be somewhat glib about it because I'm frustrated, as I think all of us are on this call, about, well, what do you do? Well, this is a really important issue. How do you change the mindset to get people to come back into work on a daily basis? Our industry doesn't pay enough to make it, even with bennies. Basically, if we don't have somebody who needs immediate benefits, it's going to be really hard to bring them in to a job that's as tough as being a parking enforcement officer or a tow truck driver or whatever.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. I'm going to read John's comment, and unless John, you want to unmute and kind of talk a little bit about what's transpired on your side.
I can pop in if you guys didn't hear me. But yeah, we're in the same boat as a lot when it comes to hiring, and that's just across the whole university. We're in Wayne State in Detroit, and we're experiencing across the city still. You can see things happening. You can see the light volume of traffic in the morning when you're coming to work, when you're going in and out. I mean, it's just, we're not there. And you talked about our numbers. I mean, we had to lay people off, and then we didn't get people back. I'm probably, at the university itself, we're probably back. Well, we're not back yet, but we're looking to get back on the 31st with students. But we'll still have to see how that works out because we're still experiencing a big push, big wave here. So, but in general, it seems like all the industries here are fighting for staffing, and we're running into the same scenario.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the input. Hey, Kristen, why don't we do poll number 2? We're at a little bit over the midway point. Why don't we do another poll and then we'll move on to another question. So this question is really designed, COVID-19 was devastating in 2020. We know that. How would you rate the impact it's had on your organization in 2021 compared to 2020? We'll give a few more minutes. All right, looks like everybody answered. Kristen, you want to end the poll?
Sharing results now.
Awesome. That's great. So, it's kind of interesting, when we thought this question up a little bit, we thought, would it be as high as it was in 2021? I mean, as high as it was in 2020. So I think the impact may be a little surprising that it's higher than we thought it was going to be, when we started to go through this poll question internally. We're going to move on to the next question, and the question has been, or at least different answers have been added around here. When we talk about like speed of recovery, this is something that we saw, and there's been a lot of talk between Brent and Pam and others about how different things, different segments reacted. Do you have a segment? This is beaches for Park Mobile. And you can see that literally in many cases, beaches were actually higher in 2020 than they were in 2019. And then they exploded in 2021. So are there segments that far outpace other segments of recovery in your operation?
So
All right,
I'll
go ahead, Scott.
I'll jump in. So we have a lot of different operations. Taxi, limo, the regulatory function, obviously those trips are still down, but everything else is pretty much, airport is almost back to pre-pandemic levels. It's moderated a little since the holidays. So I think with additional travel restrictions, you're seeing a somewhat of a dip from normal. But in the red light and speed camera areas, those numbers are through the roof. So it's very interesting. It just depends upon your mode of transportation. And when it comes to the car, people are going more places and faster.
Yes, Scott, thanks for that insight. Anyone else seeing, different, faster recoveries in a specific area of their operations? Well, it doesn't sound like it. So on that note, we'll move on to a question, and I think it's been answered by many of you. But if you look at this, this is New York City and the changes in transit. Again, it is a little bit dated on where we pulled this out of, but simply put, bridges and tunnel traffic were close to recovery early in 2021, where buses and subways and public transit, they were much slower, and we have heard that they've decreased, continue to stay, pretty steady or even decrease. So, putting the transit hat on, where is transit at your locations? And this isn't just on a municipal side. For a university side, are people taking shuttles? Is that behavior different? So I'd love to open that up to the group. Maybe we'll start, Brent, I know you talked a little bit about it. Maybe we'll start with you. Have you seen, transit levels? Where have you seen that on the CARTA side? And, have they recovered in Chattanooga? Or are they pretty low right now?
No, our transit level has not recovered. We went fare free for a long time during COVID, and obviously our numbers jumped, and then we started running into issues with having so many issues with the homeless people. We had to quickly look at adjusting the rates, and we came back probably a little quicker than we wanted to with the rates to help control that. And we just haven't seen our numbers come back yet. It's just slow coming back on that part.
Anybody else? Anybody else seeing transit levels? What's some insight on transit levels? And in addition to that, let's broaden the conversation when it comes to transit and parking. Scott made a mention of taxis and maybe TNCs. Broadly speaking, is some of the insight we're seeing is people are just want to use their vehicles, their own personal vehicles, more than using some other mode of transportation. So what are you seeing in your operations?
Dave, if you send me another softball, since I had my transit committee meeting at the time this morning, I'm going to scream. But to Scott's point, I'll break it down into two categories. Transit is probably 80% of what we experience as a region pre-COVID-19. From February of 2019 straight through to the fall of, or I should say straight through the fall, it was extremely soft, but started to come back. With that being said, I agree wholeheartedly with Scott's comments, because for our off-street operation, we have seen a steady trend
The other thing, we sit in on a lot of local meetings, so I see the numbers coming out of New Jersey, out of Petco, and out of SEPTA. Generally, their buses are doing, and trolleys are doing better than the subway. So regional rails, recovering quicker. The subway's really struggling, and I see a lot more people on mopeds or scooters, or like anything that allows you to be a little independent. That seems to be a real trend popping up.
That's a good point, Scott. Just that independence, adding that, allowing you to be a little bit independent. But what are your thoughts? And let me see if I captured what you had said properly. So the regional transit may be a little bit different impact than maybe a more long haul transit, or is that what you said?
I guess what I'm saying is the subway seems not to be the preferred method of transportation, and some of that really is probably COVID related, but some of it is also for Philadelphia a poverty homelessness issue. And, just a sense of wanting to be overall feel safe. And the reports I hear back on the subway is that would be like the last resort. So we're starting to see a little bit of the bus transit come back, but I think they're still only at generally 60%. I was on a task force for Philadelphia called Ready, Set, Go, I think is what we called it, with an exclamation point. And they had a goal of 80%, and generally most organizations only came back at 60%. So the perception that we would be back come Labor Day just wasn't a reality. And I think that's part of the variant spread as well, right? Just about every time somebody's about ready to pull the switch, you got to pull back, including us. We're on an AB schedule right now just to try to make sure we don't infect as many, to keep everybody as safe as we can is the best way to say it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And thanks for clarifying. I now understand exactly what you're saying. So opening it up to the group, anybody else have, some input on the transit side of the piece?
David, I'll comment. This is Stan. I'll comment very quickly. As you guys are probably, I know as you are probably aware, we held a traffic and transportation summit here in Atlanta a couple of months ago because we were dealing with a number of issues that a number of you guys have voiced as well. Some that we couldn't control, and of course, the behaviors of drivers and using transit. We have a homeless issue here in Atlanta as well. In addition to that, the overall theme of Department of Planning and our City Department of Transportation has been one to make the streets more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. And so as a result, that has taken away a number of traffic lanes that, impact the ability for people to drive, in particular in the environment, during COVID, where people are more comfortable kind of driving in their own bubble. Then we were kind of hit with a customer service issue, again, that we couldn't totally control because you'd have traffic congestion, people would be late for tip-offs and things of that nature. And so to exacerbate that, we are getting ready to have a break ground on a multi-billion-dollar multi-use development that's going to take away probably about 4,000 or 5,000 spaces. So quite frankly, we're not going to have the availability for individuals to park, whether it's employees or individuals coming to the concerts. And so we took information from that to see if we could kind of move the needle, even in a negative environment with transit, where we just did some surveys now to kind of see what the kind of what the attitudes of some of our customers and employees would be. For example, on the employee side, getting a free transit card for the month that they could not only use to come to work, but they could also use, among other things. And then in addition, instead of using, say, maybe using, obviously we have a relationship with Park Mobile for those individuals to be able to park at outlying lots, we would pay for it. And then we would, have them scan in so we can kind of keep up with the numbers of individuals who are parking. And then lastly, for on the customer side of things, to look at, maybe moving the needle for a certain population of our regular attendees or season ticket members, if in fact that their game ticket also had loaded value that not only would have food and other types of incentives, but it would also have transportation as well. So your ticket basically and that barcode would be able to be used across multiple platforms. The transit system, obviously gaining entry into the arena, and then if you had loaded value for food, you would have food as well. So we're looking at all those particular opportunities because there's a number of things that are outside of control. So we're going to have to incentivize and do certain things to move the needle because that needle is not going to just move by itself.
Yeah, Stan, thanks for that insight. The needle's definitely not going to move by itself. So, it means we all have to be creative for whatever our solution is and really think as far outside of the box as possible. One question came in on the chat line, and it was actually, interestingly enough, it was even brought up by the moderator or by the contributors before. And that is really around, curb management and outdoor dining in the curb space. Brent Matthews brought up the question about, they set up these, eateries in the public curb space, in parking spaces, gave them away for free. And now it's hard to bring them back, those spaces, to a paid parking space. So the first question is, how many folks, got creative with the curb space during COVID? And two, is it something that you see that will ever, be able to come back and take that inventory back? Is this something that's going to really stay with us? So what about these curb eateries? How does it look like in your city, and what is the future of them?
We've been having that conversation this week, David, with some of our folks, and talking about when do we think the right time was to try to, bring back those spaces. I mean, we're going to look at it in the spring and possibly look at reducing some of the days, because it's just, there's rampant abuse because we can't control the abuse, and we get the complaints from the restaurants because they're like, well, there's no spaces there, but nobody can use it, and we can't be there to check it all day long. So really, it's a huge challenge, and I think sometimes the restaurants might be rather have the space back there for people to park.
This is Max DeVilliers with the City of Alexandria. We have a pretty robust on-street parking dining program, and we are transitioning from essentially a temporary setup in the street where no decking flush with the curb is required, that sort of thing, to a more permanent program that has many different requirements for the outdoor seating, dimensions, etc. And because we found that given our low meter rates, the tax revenue is much higher from the outdoor dining, from the meals tax, etc. And the parking situation did not deteriorate as a result of the outdoor seating, and a lot of businesses and residents and visitors alike have enjoyed the outdoor seating and kind of improving the pedestrian experience as well. So we've been working through on making that more permanent and transitioning into that. That'll be sometime this spring. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Max, thanks for that insight. Anybody else on these on-street eateries? Any thoughts on them? And curious to see, is this something that as professionals, as an industry, we hate to lose inventory, but is this part of the greater good or is it not part of the greater good? So, any additional thoughts on that?
Hey, David.
I like something I read the other day. Gary Means is doing this in Lexington. I'm not sure if he's on the call, but he's going back and on those spots where he's had them blocked, he's going to charge the restaurants a percentage. Like if say he was $15 a day for that space, he's going to go and maybe charge them like 25% of that. He's just trying to get the spaces back to being revenue. But he's going to charge them a lesser amount to keep those spaces the way they are. And I kind of thought that was kind of cool. We may look at that method also.
Thanks, Brent.
Hey, David, this is Rachel with IPMI. And I'm not going to put Scott on the hot seat necessarily, but Philadelphia has a long and storied history of outdoor dining. Especially in the University City District, where a lot of those business improvement districts focused on creating those outdoor dining areas way before COVID and what is fashionable, as we're talking 15, 20 years ago, showing that they really increased the value of not only the space, but the retail and the land value of those buildings, creating more dynamic environment. So Philly can't often say we're ahead of the curve, but in this case, those numbers jumped up, from a handful into the hundreds, I think in the early 2010s. So I don't know, Scott, that predates Scott's history with Philadelphia, but there is a different good there in that changing, say, of the garden of the space. We've had some really great conversations with the Research and Innovation Task Force too, that Robert Farron of the City of Columbus is one of our co-chairs. And his whole perspective on this is if they told you 18 months ago that you'd be making policy for the next 2 years, you would have handled this differently. Instead, you were told, we're opening in 30 days, we're opening in 40 days, we're opening in 80 days. So it was really impossible to make policy, sort of in that environment. So just some kicking around some food for thought. And, I don't know if Scott or others have opinions on the value of that, say, dining, streetery concepts.
Yeah, so thank you, Rachel, for, saying that. I think they're here to stay. Some of these restaurants are tiny. One that I like to frequent myself might have inside seating of 25 and they have outside seating of 40, 50. So they more than doubled in size, and it's a phenomenal restaurant. I've been there when it's been below zero and still had an enjoyable meal with heaters. So I'm personally a big believer. Sounds like you are too, Rachel. But I think they stay. Now, we don't have to administer the health-related issues and like. So I've heard some grumbling from some of the city officials, but still, I think realistically they're here to stay. They are a vibrant piece. It does make getting around the city, it does delay traffic a little bit for certain, but I just don't see them going away. I think they're very popular and overall probably better for a city than not, even though we don't like losing those spaces. And I think we lost probably about 2,000 total spaces.
Yeah, we always say we want it to be friendly but not free, right? And I think that the same precedent for, parking should be friendly but not free. It's a valued good. There's a value to both the space and the turnover of that space that I would think the same concept should apply to a streetery or a restaurant that's using that space as a public good.
That's great. And Scott, thanks for your insight. Well, we had another poll question. We had a couple of other questions. We had a question about EV charging that came in, and we're at the 5-minute mark. So we're going to close down at this point. I'm going to turn over the presentation over to Kristen. She's going to talk a little bit about what's upcoming and have me maneuver through the deck. Listen, I think what we have learned is that we could talk probably a whole nother hour or two about, the individual impact and the changes of behavior and what's some folks are doing and others are not doing, and some trends that are happening on the East Coast and maybe not on the West Coast or vice versa. It's a topic that at IPMI and at, every organization we're talking about. So ultimately, we may revisit this. We may see where this comes. We'll probably, this may be part of the some of the talk track that we have visiting us in New Orleans. So with that, let's turn it back to Kristen, and then we'll go through some of the things that are coming up that she wanted to talk through.
Thank you, David. This has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone speak about these issues today. If you could just go to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
Which one do you want me to go to?
The Shoptalk, please. Yes. So, hi, everyone. Here is a listing of our upcoming Shop Talks for 2022. We welcome your participation and hope you can join us again in March for our next Shop Talk. Registration open now for the call for awards. So IPMI's annual awards and recognition program celebrate individuals and organizations in the parking and transportation and mobility industry. Winners in the awards of excellence and professional recognition exemplify industry excellence. The call for our 2022 awards opened on January 11th and will run through March 15th, 2022. And then I think there's one or two. Here we go. So we also invite you to visit our Stay Connected page. Our community has a long history of being resourceful and helpful during both good and difficult times. IPMI wants to thank you for your membership, your support, your willingness to jump in and connect, and your dedication to our industry. So at this time, I want to thank David Hoyt, Pam Corbin, Brent Matthews for moderating today's Shop Talk. And I also want to thank all of you for attending today's Shop Talk. You may now disconnect. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.